Right, well, let's move on to our press review now this Monday. That's, as usual, with James Creedon. It's the international press review now.
Good morning, Phil.
Good morning. We're starting with Mr. Mladic, the endgame very much described there by the International Herald Tribune.
That's right. They've got a very detailed piece on the final months and I suppose the final years really that led up to Radko Mladic's arrest and his transfer to The Hague. A resolute endgame, they call it in the International Herald Tribune. And what they're saying is, back as far as 2005, his state pension was frozen, which means that for the last 5 to 6 years, he was surviving on the support of an ever-shrinking group of supporters. So they're looking at who those supporters were, where his safe havens were for the last...
This was in Belgrade, was it?
In Belgrade and around the country, indeed. And so they're saying, for instance, over the weekend, a leading Serbian paper called Blik reported, based on anonymous sources, that Mladic had been given refuge in an Orthodox church monastery called San Melanije for quite some time. At the time, he fell very ill while he was staying at this monastery, according to this report. He suffered a stroke. He was gravely ill. They even prepared a crypt for him in front of the altar in that monastery. The Diocese of Bačka, which is run by a well-known nationalist bishop, says the New York Times International Herald Tribune, they refused to comment when contacted by journalists over the weekend. So there's a look now at who supported him, perhaps even the Orthodox Church to some extent or another, and how he managed to escape arrest for so long.
Yes, it was a very long time. Ratko Mladic expected at the International Criminal Court in The Hague relatively soon, but there is still an extradition appeal pending, quite probably there, from the lawyers of Ratko Mladic. Let's move on now to another US newspaper, the Wall Street Journal there. What's the story you've got there for us?
Iran is planning to unplug the internet. You can see it on the top banner here. Now, this is a story. It's up online for the last day or two, but it's in their Monday edition this morning. Iran is taking steps towards a radical new form of censorship, says the Wall Street Journal, a so-called nationalist internet, which I suppose is really an intranet, that would disconnect Iranian cyberspace from the rest of the world. So the idea is that it would be a sort of a halal form of internet. That's according...
The internet has very much been our way to find out what's been going on in Iran over the last few years, hasn't it?
Absolutely, and now I suppose Iranians will be cut off from finding out what's going on in the rest of the world if they get their way. Reza Begheri Azal, he's the director of the telecommunications industry, he told an Iranian news agency that 60% of the nation's homes will be on the new network soon, and within 2 years the whole country. So that's one way of dealing with revolutions around the world which are being stirred up by the internet, I suppose.
Indeed, presumably a network that not everybody will want to subscribe to necessarily. And another US newspaper you've got for us there, still the fallout from the Dominique Strauss-Kahn scandal, I suppose, of course unconfirmed, all of this. And a lot has been said now about how this story has been covered on both sides of the pond.
Right, and in particular, I suppose, how French Americans are responding to this and responding to that coverage that has differed so much in the French and US papers. For the French, DSK's arrest, it forces some questions of identity. Now, there's some 70,000 French Americans in New York City and the surrounding area, and this case has been the talk of restaurants, restaurant workers, academics. So they spoke to a number of people. Marie-Monique Steckel, she's at the Alliance Française in New York City, and she said the case tarnished the image of France. She was surprised at how emotional she was about the case. She said, "My Frenchness came to the fore more than I thought." Now, although many French Americans think that Americans react very prudishly to sex scandals amongst their own politicians, there is a difference between a womanizer and rape, says Marie-Monique. So the New York Times says really that it has forced many native French people to reassess what part of them has evolved into an American and what part of them has remained in the homeland. Another woman, Anne Cote-Voz, she runs a health food store on the Upper West Side. She said her blood boiled when she saw how Dominique Strauss-Kahn was treated by some of the media and by the police, that famous perp walk where he was handcuffed, a scene which would be illegal in France. Another guy, Thomas Bishop, who works on French studies at the New York University, he says that the tabloids dismissed DSK as a frisky Frenchman, whereas French Americans often would view his fall from power as that of a man with a tragic flaw. So interesting kind of dynamic there about how they're, what would you say, dealing with their Frenchness in the US.
Very much the talk of the town in Paris and in New York as well, as you can see there. We have to go to this last story. Well worth it. It's from the Telegraph. Go on, James. This is well
Ernie
worth the
and
wait.
Bert left-wing propaganda tools. Now that is.
Are you asking me?
That is the charge being levelled by Ben Shapiro in a new book called Primetime Propaganda. He's looking at shows like Sesame Street and how they might be vehicles for spreading the radical agenda of the left side of the political spectrum. Sesame Street referred to Fox News as Pox News in 2009. That's just one example of.
And there is that shocking picture of
one of the characters. If we could show them just the next picture as well, very quickly. Bert and Ernie, perhaps left-wing propaganda.
There they are. We do
tools.
know them. Yes.
Seems a bit ridiculous to me, but anyway.
Well, thank you very much, James. That's James Creedon, as usual, with the press review.